Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 56 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'm flying solo today. I wanted to get one more episode of Chalk Talk in before the NFL Draft. Be sure you are joining in our NFL Draft live stream tomorrow night, Thursday, starting at 8 o'clock Eastern. And then our coverage will start on Friday at 7 o'clock Eastern at the start of the second round. So those links, those streams are already created on YouTube. Make sure you set a reminder. I'll tweet them out as well. Come hang out with us. We're going to be talking about the draft. We're going to be analyzing the picks, breaking it all down for all the different teams, not just the Eagles. So I've been hard at work on team graphics and big boards and all of that stuff, and I'm really excited to get to put that out there and hang out with you guys for the draft tomorrow. But before we get there, I wanted to get on here and do one last Eagles mock draft. And so this is going to be a 7-round mock draft for the Eagles with trades. And then I'm going to dig into a draft mailbag and answer a few questions I've got on Twitter. So if you're watching, you can throw questions in the comments as we go along too, and I'll try to address those as we get to the end. So I did this mock draft before I came on, so I wasn't having to look at picks. I could do a little bit smoother job here since I don't have a co-host for today. So I'm going to share my screen. I did this at the Draft Network. I did allow trades, and so we'll just go through and talk about what we did. And so at the top of the draft, the Jaguars at number 1 went Travon Walker. The Lions at number 2, Aiden Hutchinson. The Texans took Sauce Gardner at 3. At 4, the Jets took Derek Stingley. At 5, the Giants took Evan Neal. At 6, the Panthers took Ikem Ekwonu, the offensive tackle out of North Carolina State. At 7, the Giants took Kayvon Thibodeaux. At 8, the Falcons took Garrett Wilson. 9, Malik Willis went off the board to the Seahawks. 10, the Jets took Charles Cross, the offensive tackle out of Mississippi State. And then at 11, the Washington Commanders, it's going to be a really hard habit to break, took wide receiver Drake London out of USC. And so I picked up the phone and I called the Minnesota Vikings, because my number 1 guy in the draft was falling, and the slide stops at number 12. As I trade up with the Vikings, I gave up an early 4th-round pick to move from 15 to 12 and select Kyle Hamilton, the safety out of Notre Dame. My love for Kyle Hamilton goes back. If you followed our positional rankings, you heard me say on the safety podcast that this is the best defensive prospect that I've ever evaluated. People are concerned about the 40 time. I'm here to tell you that his 40 time doesn't matter. There's no player in this draft that will revolutionize your defense on day 1 like Kyle Hamilton. You can use him in center field. You can use him as a split field safety. You can put him in the box. You can put him in the slot. He can be a linebacker. He can do it all, and he's going to do it all for the Eagles, a team that desperately needs safety help. He's going to come in. He's going to be a starter day 1, and to be honest, he's going to be one of the better players on this back 7 of the defense in his rookie season. And so I would be thrilled if Kyle Hamilton fell here like this and the Eagles are able to go up and get him. Fingers crossed that happens, but we get Kyle Hamilton at 12 overall. And so we scroll down to pick 18, and I do not make the pick at 18 because the Green Bay Packers called me. I didn't initiate this trade, they did. And so they called me and they offered me their 1st-round pick at 28, so the second of their 1st-round picks, and they offered me a 2nd rounder and a 7th rounder for my 1st rounder and a 5th rounder. So we've got a Jets fan here says the Jets aren't taking Cross. I didn't pick any of the picks except for the Eagles picks, but the Jets are very likely going to take an offensive tackle, especially with the reports about Mekhi Becton. But just for clarification, I only made the Eagles picks. The rest were made with a simulator. So anyways, I trade back to 28 with the Packers. I pick up a 2nd, and then I turn a 7th, and I give up a 1st and a 5th. And so at 28, I take a guy who is my wide receiver 1 in the draft. It's Treylon Burks out of Arkansas. I love Treylon Burks. I love his size and his speed profile. I see a lot of Deebo Samuel, albeit a bigger, more powerful version of Samuel. I don't think this is a guy you want to just stick outside and ask him to run a whole route tree because he doesn't have the best routes. He's a little raw in that area, but he's a guy you can manufacture touches for, and he's a guy you can get deep with. So he's got great build-up speed. You can run him on vertical routes. He also creates separation on hitch routes really well because of his vertical threat. And so I think this is a guy you can use deep. You can use him shallow. You can use him behind the line of scrimmage. He's a guy that you can get the ball into his hands, and he's not a bad jump ball receiver either. And so Treylon Burks is my favorite wide receiver in this draft. I get him at 28 here, and I'm really excited with this first round and how it's played out so far. So we're going to go on to the second round, and I'm just going to switch over to my user picks here. So in the second round, I take interior defensive lineman Perrion Winfrey out of Oklahoma. This is pick 51. This is a pick that I got. I believe it came from the Packers trade. So we pick up Perrion Winfrey. Perrion Winfrey is a guy that I've watched play a lot at OU since he came there as a JUCO transfer. He was used anywhere from a 0 tech to a 5 tech at Oklahoma. He was easily their most talented defensive lineman, so they moved him all over the field. He's very explosive getting up the field, and so he's a guy that can rush the passer. He can penetrate against the run. Maybe not like a top-notch run defender, but I think that's a part of his game that he can grow. He was used on stunts and twists and so many things to take advantage of his athleticism at OU. I do think that the knocks on his gap integrity are a little overstated because he wasn't asked to do that. He was just asked to be disruptive. So Perrion Winfrey, the Eagles can use him to rush from the interior. They like to use a rotation there, so they can use him a lot there as they bring him along as a run defender. Probably not a guy you're putting on the field, in short yardage situations at this point in his career, but he doesn't have to be because you do have Fletcher Cox. You do have Javon Hargrave, but both are on expiring contracts. And so Winfrey, you can bring him along, you can use him in a rotation, and he can be a starter for you in his second year. And then a few picks later at pick 59, we go back to the well of Alabama that treated us so well last year with Devonta Smith and select linebacker Christian Harris. Christian Harris was a 3-year starter for Alabama. He's an exceptional athlete, over a 9.0 relative athletic score. This is a guy, he can cover running backs out of the backfield. He can carry tight ends up the seam, and he's physical in the running game. And so he's a 3-down linebacker, which the Eagles need. Yes, they went and got Kazir White, and they are fairly similar in the position. You want both of those guys to be a will linebacker, but when you just don't have talent at the linebacker position like the Eagles don't, you can figure that out. One of these guys can play the mic, and it'll be fine. And so Christian Harris gives you another piece at linebacker for a team that has neglected linebacker for far too long. And I think he steps in and makes an instant impact as well. Moving on to pick 83 in the third round, I selected Sam Williams, the edge out of Ole Miss. Now, I think the ideal usage for Sam Williams is going to be a guy that he can play with a hand in the dirt as a 4-3 defensive end, and then he can stand up as a 3-4 outside linebacker. I think his ideal usage is going to be a scheme that's going to bounce him around and take advantage of that. I'm not sure if that's what Jonathan Gannon wants to do. And if it is what he wants to do, you're going to use Hassan Reddick as that stand-up pass rusher. So I do think it's not the best scheme fit, but I do think he can just slot in and play 4-3 defensive end. You can stand him up if Hassan Reddick is out of the game or gets hurt or something like that. But the biggest strength he has is converting speed to power to win off of the edge. And I think he's strong enough to beat double teams inside too. He took a big leap in 2021 with his extra year of COVID eligibility. And so this is a guy that you're going to bring along slowly, I think. He's not going to play a ton likely as a rookie because the Eagles do have Brandon Graham. They've got Josh Sweat. They went and got Reddick, who I think they're going to rush a lot. They like Milton Williams, who they can play inside and outside. They brought back Derek Barnett. So it is a crowded edge room. But Williams is a good developmental piece. And I think that he could, in a year or two, he could be a good starting level player for this team, similarly to what they did with Josh Sweat a few years ago. Then we scroll down, and I made my last trade of the draft with the 49ers at pick 93. I traded pick 101 and pick 237 for pick 93 to go up and get another one of my guys, tight end Jelani Woods out of Virginia. Jelani Woods is literally the most athletic tight end that's ever tested at the combine. He has a 10.0 relative athletic score. He's huge. He's fast. He can block well. He knows how to run routes. He was actually a quarterback at Oklahoma State before he transitioned to tight end, and then he moved or he transferred to UVA because he was just being used as a blocker at Oklahoma State. It wasn't using his potential, but he does have that background as a blocker. And so the Eagles like these athletic tight ends. You saw with Tyree Jackson, another quarterback to tight end transition guy last year. And unfortunately, he got hurt in training camp and then again at the end of the year. So the Eagles like this profile. They need a tight end too, because you don't want to rely on Jackson coming off of a second injury. I love Jelani Woods. I love the fit. Maybe a little early for him. Consensus does not have him this high, but I have him at number 82 on my big board, which is quite a bit ahead of consensus. So I would love Jelani Woods trading into the back of the third round there to pick him up. Now, I know what you're thinking. Where are the cornerbacks? Well, although it's likely the Eagles will take a cornerback early, in this mock, I took a safety early, and it just sort of got pushed down the board. But we do go to cornerback at pick 154 in the 5th round, and I selected cornerback Zion McCallum out of Sam Houston State. Another one of these athletic freaks. McCallum has a 10.0 relative athletic score, which again means he also is the most athletic cornerback for his size that's ever tested at the combine. He's got great ball production. In 56 games at Sam Houston State, he had 13 interceptions, 54 pass breakups. He's getting his hand on the ball more than once a game, which is just incredible. He's got incredible size and speed, like I talked about with the RAS score. Now, I think McCallum is a pretty good zone fit with his length, with his fluidity. I think he's going to work best in a zone scheme, which seems to be what the Eagles want to run. They were a fairly zone-heavy team last year. I don't know that McCallum is going to step in and be that outside cornerback for you right away, but you don't expect that out of a 5th-round pick. I think this is a guy that can learn from Darius Slay, and I think he's got incredible upside, even if he's pretty raw here. But you bet on those traits in the 5th round, and you go get this guy. Now at 162, this is a placeholder. The screen says I selected Jordan Stout, the punter out of Penn State. That's because Matt Ariza is for some reason not listed in the Draft Network's mock draft machine. Jordan Stout is the only specialist that's in there. So I'm not sure why that is, but the actual selection we're making here at 162 is punter Matt Ariza out of San Diego State University. And I'm half doing this so one of my longtime listeners, Squidward Tentacles on Twitter, does not give me a hard time about not picking a punter. In fact, he retweeted my Eagles draft needs graphic and he photoshopped a punter onto it last night. So doing this to satisfy him, but also because the Eagles, they need a punter. They don't have one on the roster right now. They may have Cameron Johnson. I can't remember if they let him go. They should let him go. Bad end of the year last year. They need to get a punter. Ariza has a tremendous leg. In the 5th round, go shore that up. Have a punter for a decade. That'll be good. And then we go to our last pick 249 in the 7th round, and I selected Josh Jobe out of Alabama. Josh Jobe is more of a man fit than a zone fit, but he was the only player that I have ranked in the top 100. I have him at 98 overall that was left on the board. And so rather than forcing a pick for a running back or something like that, I just went with a guy who's clearly by far my best player left available. Jobe he's very aggressive, which he can be prone to penalties from grabbing. He's a little grabby. I think he's more of a man fit than a zone fit, but with McCallum, with Jobe, you can let these guys learn. You can bring them along slowly. I mean, you hope that one of them can be a starter for you this year. That'd be fantastic value out of a 5th or a 7th round, but you don't expect that. But it does give you some pieces that you can use to develop down the road. And so that is my draft. Just to recap here, at 12, we traded up for Kyle Hamilton. Then we traded back to 28, and we took Treylon Burks, the wide receiver. Then in the 2nd round, we snagged interior defensive lineman Perion Winfrey and linebacker Christian Harris. In the 3rd round, we selected edge Sam Williams out of Ole Miss and then traded up for tight end Jelani Woods. With our pair of 5th-round picks, we took cornerback Zion McCallum out of Sam Houston State and punter Matt Ariza out of San Diego State University. And then in the 7th round, we took a flyer on cornerback Josh Jobe out of Alabama. So that's it. This is my final Eagles mock draft. Let me know what you think. I'll post this show on Twitter, and I'll also go ahead and tweet out my full mock and let you guys grade it. So let's move on now from the mock draft And let's move to a draft mailbag. I got a few questions. I put this out. I had 4 different questions come in. And so we'll just go down the line here. The first one had asked me to rank the defensive prospects from Georgia. And so Georgia had, obviously a fantastic run defense last year, or not run defense, a tremendous defense. And so they want to know, how would I rank these defensive prospects up against each other? So I pulled up our TPL NFL Draft Guide. If you have not checked this out, go check it out. It's in my Twitter links. This will allow you, it's got all of the combine data, pro day data, it's got the relative athletic scores, and then it has my personal big board, it has Mr. Crockpot's big board, it's got Mark's big board, and it's got some public big boards and a consensus. And so the link is view only, so you can only look at it, but if you make a copy of it, then you can actually get access to the sorting and filtering. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to filter here by Georgia. We'll just see where they stack up on my big board. Okay, so my number 1, if I'm ranking them here, I'm going to go Jordan Davis 1, Trayvon Walker 2, Nakobe Dean 3, Devontae Wyatt 4, Lewis Cine 5, Quay Walker 6, Channing Tindall 7. So that's how I would rank the 7 defensive prospects from Georgia. I'm really high on Jordan Davis. I'm very high on him. I've got him at 7 overall on my big board. I think he's an elite run-stopping defensive tackle with elite athleticism, and he's got the chance to develop into a really good pass rusher as well, although that has not been a big part of his game. Trayvon Walker is 16 on my list. He is another guy that just tremendous athleticism, but has no pass rush chops. And so I'm lower on him. He is a good run defender. I'm less concerned about that as an edge. And so I pushed him down my board probably quite a bit lower than consensus just because I haven't seen it with him, but the upside is fantastic. Nakobe Dean at 25 on my big board, very, very good player. Positional value brings him down a little bit for me. Devontae Wyatt is number 4 of this group on my big board. He's got a lot of off-the-field things that are coming up that are concerns and red flags, so I'm uncomfortable with taking him, and that pushed him down my board a little bit. Lewis Cine would be the next guy. He's at 35 overall, just outside my first round. I think Cine is a really good safety, tremendous athleticism. He does seem to be falling in this draft, and there's other safeties that are coming over him here. This is a guy that I think analysts and NFL teams might look at a little differently. And then we rounded out with Quay Walker and Channing Tindall, who are also both inside of my top 100. So that's how I've got him rated. Consensus, if I sort it by consensus here, let's see how that changes. So consensus would flip Davis and Walker, and then it would still go Dean, Wyatt, Cine, Walker, Tindall. So consensus is the same as me, except they would flip Trayvon Walker and Jordan Davis. So that's how that one would come out. Download that, play around with it. I think it's pretty cool. It's got a lot of tabs we're going to be using. It'll all be on our live draft show tomorrow night. Okay, my second question that came in asked, and this was kind of a fun one, let me do some research and play around with, but they asked, how high would you draft a punter who was guaranteed to pin the ball inside the 10-yard line every punt? So there's a punter coming out in the draft. Hypothetically, it's a guarantee 100% of his punts will be downed inside the 10-yard line. They want to know, how high would this guy go? And so I did some digging. And so it turns out the average score per possession that starts inside the 10 is about a half a point. So for every possession where your starting field position is inside the 10-yard line, you're expected to score a half of a point. At the 20, it goes right around 1 point. So if you start a drive at the 20, you're expected to score 1 point per drive. So at 12 possessions a game, that is a 6-point margin difference from pinning it inside the 10 to a touchback. But every drive also doesn't start that deep. You get the drives that you're punting from inside your own 10, and so they're getting the ball at the 50 or the 40 or things like that. So I looked at average starting field position, which is about the 26.5-yard line. That gives you an expected points of 1.3. So over 12 possessions a game, the difference from average field position to inside the 10 is 9.6 points per game. So having this punter is going to give you about a 9.6 point difference in terms of what your defense is going to hold the opposing offense for. And that doesn't take into account, the possession where, like I said, you're pinned inside the 10 and you can flip it with a guaranteed 80-yard punt. And so given that, we're talking about a 10-point swing per game. I would take that guy number one overall. You're guaranteeing yourself 10 points a game, basically. No other player is going to do that. So if there was ever a guy like that, I would sprint to the board to take him number one overall. Now, I don't think the NFL would do it, but I personally would do that. I think it would be tremendous value. And now I'm really curious about how valuable a kicker would be that was guaranteed to hit 60-yard field goals or something like that. But I'll leave that thought exercise for another day, so I'm not trying to do math on the fly here. So punter that can pin it inside the 10 every time, I'm taking him number one. Okay, our third question asks, why don't all teams value the players the same? They're watching the same tape. What's the difference? Okay, so if you have scouts watch tape, by and large, they're going to come to the same consensus evaluating the traits of a player. Now, there's differences, but the differences in value come from two things. It comes from scheme and it comes from projection. So, for example, look at a guy, let's talk about projection first. Look at a guy like Travon Walker, a guy that I'm lower on. People that are high on him, in fact, the Jags are likely going to take him number one overall tomorrow night. This guy has 9.5 sacks in 3 years in college, and they're going to take him to be a premier edge rusher based on his traits. Now, every scout looks at the traits, and they see those traits. The scouts that would be willing to take him that high, they are projecting him favorably to the NFL. They're saying, we think these traits are going to translate, and we think he's going to be able to learn how to rush the passer. So they're making a projection that somebody like me is not willing to make. I'm not willing to take that leap and project him that favorably to the NFL. So they're seeing the same traits, they're seeing the same things on tape, but the projections can be different. How you think it manifests itself at the next level. That's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is scheme related. Let's use the example of a cornerback. The Baltimore Ravens run a lot of zone coverage. They run a lot of zone blitz coverage. And so they need their cornerbacks to do something different than the Patriots, who are a more man-heavy team. And so you get a corner that is really good on the line. He can get his hands on you. He can disrupt the routes. He can mirror routes, but he's not good at having to flip his hips and run downfield. Well, that guy is not going to be maximized in the Ravens scheme. They want their corners off, and they want their corners to be able to, run with these guys because they don't have a lot of help. And on the flip side, you get a corner that, like a Trent McDuffie, who is really good with his eyes in the backfield. He's good at reading and diagnosing plays. Well, he's not going to be as valuable to the Patriots because they're more man-heavy. They don't need him reading the quarterback. They want his eyes on the receiver, and they want a guy that can disrupt routes. And so you get into scheme there. Even within zone, the types of zone matter. If you're a cover 3 team, you need a corner that can operate downfield. You can't have, a 5'11" guy playing corner there. But if you're a cover 2 team, that guy's protected over the top by a safety. So there's a lot that goes into it there. You could look at offensive line, and is your team an inside zone versus an outside zone versus a power running team? They're going to value these guys differently. The inside zone team or the outside zone team, they want guys that are good lateral movers on the interior of their offensive line versus the power running team just wants a strong guy that can push up the middle. And so there's all kinds of schematic things that go into it as well. So I hope that answers your question. And then we'll move on to the last one. It asked, who are you the highest on relative to consensus, and who are you lowest on relative to consensus? So again, I just used my big board for the picks that I have in, and I just sorted it. And so according to that, I am highest relative to consensus on running back Breece Hall out of Iowa State. I have him 19 spots above consensus at my number 42 overall player. Now, I know there's concerns about his durability. He had an extremely high workload in college. He has over 700 touches in his career at Iowa State, which can be concerning. But I think just evaluating the player, he has the size, the speed, and the vision to be a day one impact player. He's really good in the passing game, both catching out of the backfield and in pass protection. So I think he's a guy that you can bring in. And I think, there's probably 12 to 16 teams in the NFL that he could come in and be their starter, the running back one, a 3-down back, and he could have a fantastic rookie season. And so Breece Hall is a guy, if he's there in the second round, I think he's a good value. I'm not a big running back in the first round guy, which honestly probably dropped him further down my board than it does for the consensus overall. So Breece Hall is who I'm highest on. The guy I'm lowest on compared to consensus is Sam Howell, the quarterback out of UNC. I have him 21 spots below consensus on our big board at 85 overall. And so watching Sam Howell, last year it was thought he might be the number one pick. He was going to compete with Spencer Rattler for the number one pick. And now Howell's out here with a third-round grade, and Spencer Rattler transferred after he lost his starting job to a true freshman who also transferred. Which just goes to show you that everyone that's talking about next year's QB class, we don't have any idea what's going to develop over the next year. You have guys that fall from grace. You have guys that have a crazy senior year and elevate themselves like Joe Burrow did a few years ago into being a top pick. For Sam Howell, he's got an NFL arm, and he throws the ball accurately all over the field. The problem with him is what happens before the throw. He has a 10% sack rate and an 11% scramble rate out of the pocket. Now, he's mobile. He can't scramble with that consistency in the NFL, though. So he invites a lot of pressure with his pocket management. He has a never say die attitude, which I've seen burn Carson Wentz for years. Sam Howell I see being one of these guys, a Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz type that will not let a play die and is going to invite a lot of pressure. And we've seen how that played out for Carson Wentz. We've seen how that has played out for Baker Mayfield. I see Sam Howell in that same sort of bucket, and it's just not a guy that I want to tie my franchise to. Like, I want a quarterback to be aggressive, but I want him to be smart. And there's a lot of things that Sam Howell does on the football field in the face of pressure that cause me to question his football IQ. So Sam Howell is who I'm lowest on. Breece Hall is who I am highest on relative to consensus. Well, that's going to about wrap it up here for episode number 56 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, be sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you are tuning in for our live draft shows Thursday and Friday night. We're going to be live. I'm going to be hosting all through the first 3 rounds, breaking down every pick. Go check out my Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL right here. I'm tweeting out throughout the day today team need graphics, listing all of their picks. I have tweeted out NFL prop bets form. We're going to be giving away NFL draft merchandise to anybody that can outpick me, Dibes, and Mark on our NFL first round prop bets. So make sure you fill that out. It's also in my Twitter. Check out our NFL draft guide. Download a copy and play around. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. So, like I said, give me a follow on Twitter, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow night. So from me, from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.